We titled the Pesach collection Breaking Free. Jewish people broke free from the Yamsa, we broke free from Mitzrayim. And so the point of Pesach for us on a day-to-day is to break free from our minds. And we all have things, traumas that we have to break free from, and it can take a lifetime. Life is our mind, so it's the hardest thing to break free from the shackles of our own brains. We hold ourselves back, and we are so ingrained, robotic pattern that we follow because we're just stuck in our minds. That's really the conversation, is how to break free.
And one of the biggest things I think people want is to feel free, to experience freedom, emotional freedom in all areas of life. And Pesach is a perfect opportunity to look at the places where we're kind of stuck, where we haven't integrated a concept and experience and emotion, to find ways to actually find that freedom or that openness so we can breathe and actually experience Pesach and really embody the lessons that Pesach has to teach us.
And I think like trauma really holds us back from being present in our lives and really experiencing our lives to the fullest. It shapes the way we love, it shapes the way we connect with others, it shapes the way we connect to ourselves. And I think that, ultimately we all want to live beautiful lives, we all want to be present. And I think that the things that are stored in our minds and body really we hold on to and really prevents us from living the life.
It creates like a layer. There's just like a layer on top of your soul. How do you peel it off?
What would you say to people who are listening to this and they would say, I'm fine, I'm doing great. Right. I don't know, I've never been exposed to trauma, I don't have trauma, I don't know what they're talking about, stuck, I'm living a great life, it's successful, I'm successful.
Tell them to read Emotional Inheritance. Anyone read that? It's really about like intergenerational trauma. It doesn't mean that every stressful event is traumatic, but definitely every traumatic event is stressful. And you don't necessarily have had to have gone through a disaster or a life event or a loss. Trauma is passed down. The levels of cortisol in people of grandchildren who were survivors of the Holocaust, and they saw that the levels are different, right? So at some point, someone had a grandmother that experienced the loss. It could have been a sibling, it could have been a child, and it's passed on in some way. And you don't even know it. It's the secrets that are not told, that are stored in our body and our mind. That's what I would say. You cannot say that no one along in your family did not experience a trauma. It doesn't mean that you're traumatized, but we are all carrying something.
So I think what you're saying is that not only could it be passed behaviorally, but also in the DNA, in the gene pool, it's being passed through. So even if you don't feel like you have it, you have it.
Yeah. Right, and it's the concept of epigenetic research, right? It's kind of like if you're looking at it from like a neuropsychological, kind of what you're saying on a physiological level. And I love this conversation. You're basically talking to one kind of person. One kind of person might say, I don't know what trauma is, or I say like drop the word trauma. Let's just look at how you are. When you think about Pesach, when you think about your current lives, your loved ones, how you feel, how you think, how you connect to the concept of like Pesach or Frumkeit or your relationship with this holiday, that gives you information. So there's those people. And if they do or don't have a reaction, kind of what Eliza just said, like maybe you are having a reaction, or maybe you are present or not present, or whatever it is that might come in the way of you being connected to the holiday. But then there's people who are suffering, and they find the holidays to be very triggering or activating, or find ways to distract. And I wonder if maybe we could talk a little bit about, you mentioned trauma as like a stressful event that's hard to integrate. I know can I share 3 things that usually are helpful with trauma? Trauma is like, expanding on what you said, is like an event that somebody goes through or watches somebody else go through, where there's either real or perceived threat to their basic safety. So, right, it could even be perceived, and that's the concept of like, either it was real threat to myself or to someone I love. And then there's 2 other factors where there was nothing I could have done to prepare myself to know what's happening, and there was nothing that I can do to protect myself. And the last thing that's really hard is that the person usually feels disconnected, like you said, from themselves or others. And so there's feeling of disconnection. And I think part of what we want to talk about here is this concept of A, connecting to our minds and bodies, and B, connecting to each other, because that's part of where healing happens for any kind of emotional distress.
I love what you just said, Esther. I agree with that. It could be terrifying to hear that we have to start connecting when we've been hurt by the people who we're supposed to be connected to.
It could be really scary, like living in the solution.
Yeah.
Could also be part of like...
Because the wound is in the relationship, so then the healing has to happen in the relationship. We're talking about complex trauma, right? So we're expanding the conversation a little bit, where there's a wound that happened within a relationship. So the healing is going to be with connection, but that in and of itself is very triggering. The real word trigger in trauma language, that means that the nervous system's getting overwhelmed just thinking about it or imagining it or sensing it. So that could be something that's really, really hard, but it's totally possible.
Yeah, and I also think that like people think that healing from trauma is like this external thing that has happened to me, and I need to then therefore like, you know, like it's this external, like you said, right, perceives a threat to one's safety. But really what it was, right, it's this internal state that your mind and your nervous system was in that couldn't be present. So I think part of the healing is we're not looking at it as like this external thing, but it's really about how can I internally look inside myself and come in touch with my feelings, connect to ourselves, connect to other people. I think that's like the real,
In the like smallest, most minuscule ways. Like it could be cellular, and it can make a difference.
Yeah, like the micro moments, right? You're saying like it's not this like esoteric concept. People think like I'm going on a journey to heal my trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, it's like right here, right now. Like when you mentioned relationships, I just want to say it could even be your relationship to a holiday. Relationship to Pesach, right? I know there was a time in my life where I was like, I'm not doing Pesach this year. And it happens through, and I took some time and I reached out to support. Actually, what I needed was to tap into this concept of healing and redemption on a deeper level. And after I worked through my like irritation or annoyance, there was messages in Pesach or the holiday of Pesach that was very healing for me. So when you talk about connection, I know you're talking maybe about relationships with ourselves or others. I think even shifting our relationship, I know this conversation, Yaeli, is all a matter of like freedom, and I hope that whoever is here can listen to that we're having a conversation about what is freedom, right? Like the shackles that live in your heart and your mind or your irritation or whatever it is, like that's part of or becoming aware of. Maybe we could talk about like what are the signs that let you know that you're feeling maybe trapped.
So what are the signs that make you feel like you're trapped?
I think if anyone, let's say if they think about Pesach or just in our daily life, if there's a feeling of like anxiety, nervousness, irritability, a difficulty to really connect to the present moment, this need to like avoid situations, people, conversations, feeling trapped in your own life, like maybe there is something that you pull away from, right? Like you might have an unconscious part of you that isn't reaching for the stars in some area of your life, or you're not having those hard conversations because it feels too scary. Or maybe there's a lot of like feeling of like anger or frustration that's kind of trapped in the body. Generic trauma symptoms I think are like flashbacks or anxiety or feelings of depression or disconnecting.
Hypo.
Yeah.
When somebody's been through a traumatic event, their mind and body reacts in a way that's going to help them survive. So there's different ways that the brain or body will do that. And you could go into a hyper-aroused state or a hypo-aroused state. So in the hyper-aroused state, you're fighting. There's like a lot of blood pumping into your muscles that you're ready to fight, or something like that. Your heart rate's going up. So if you're noticing that happens to you, it's your body's way of preparing you to survive. And then there's the hypo-aroused state, which is more the disconnected, like freeze response, right? Or dissociation, which is very, very common. Yeah. Some people are really good at dissociating, especially if they were traumatized as young children.
Can you become hypo and then hyper and then go to hypo? Switch on back and forth.
You could like, it's like a window, right? Here's the window where you can like think and feel at the same time.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about,
One
like
way
hyper
didn't work, and then you just go to the other.
Right. So you could go up here, and then you could like drop down to like depressed, numb, and then kind of swing up here.
Yeah, hypo was like that numbness, that lack of connection.
Is one worse than the other?
They're both amazing.
Right.
Seriously.
They're both survival skills.
Sometimes you really notice.
creative.
I'll tell you what it is. Hyper is so much more apparent. So sometimes
Right.
you might not realize that people are traumatized because they always just seem very,
Yeah.
like, you know, and really it's internally they're so
Totally.
disconnected.
Especially if they're fawning, right? Which is the people pleasing, just try to get through this situation, like by pleasing so that we can just get through it. That can look very functional.
It can look
But the person's terrified inside.
What you said before about like trauma, like what you were saying about like the symptoms, right? So it could come up in our nervous system every day. People can be more anxious because of it. Some people even struggle with self-harm, addictions, eating disorder, right? Those are all symptoms of trauma. I mean, not always, but often. And you know, they say that trauma, there's no memories, but there's symptoms, right? Yeah. And that's really what it is. And it's so fun. So you could see that in your nervous system, right? But then there's the pieces like what you were both saying of every day, the things that show up. So it's how are you relating to your boss, your coworkers? Are you feeling very dissociated? Are you feeling just not present? Are you rushing? Are you over-industrialized where you're just constantly just running to the next thing? And I'm not saying this always means that you're traumatized, but this idea of like, I can't be present in my experience. And it could show up, you know, your boss just said, oh, hey, would you mind just handing it in, you know, next time, 2 days before? And someone who has trauma, they might experience that as my boss was criticizing me. Right, and that's where it's showing up. It's showing up in the small thing. I had a friend, you know, we were once discussing, it's like, why is it that certain things bother us so much, right? And for another person, it's so not a big deal.
So the goal is to like meet. You should come like into your body.
Yeah. integrate.
Right.
Every, like socially, emotionally, cognitively,
one.
physiologically, like integrating. It's throughout our lives.
It's not like you made it.
Yeah, and it's not like, you know, people come to therapy, like, I want to do trauma work. So first of all, you have to be ready to do trauma work, right? I think that's one of the barriers that a lot of us face. It's like, either I want to do trauma work and I'm on this journey and I'm starting today, and then a lot of times it's also the opposite of, I had no trauma in my life. Like, I find that's sometimes like the extremes that we see.
So Esther, when in moments when people have those like feelings of feeling irritated, or what's like a tidbit that someone can take?
Yeah. I love that question because it's almost like, what's the takeaway? I think one of the biggest things is, like, I always say, like, can you listen into your body? It's almost like your body is like Google Translate to what's going on inside. And so one of the things, like from our trainings and somatic training, one of the things that we've learned is to learn how to read the language of the body. So let's say I meet someone, like Aliza was saying, someone might like overfunction. You might also notice someone who's always like picking fights with people or being very defensive. So I think like one thing is, if you notice yourself, can you be open to being a little bit aware? Because although awareness could be a little uncomfortable, being not aware is brutally uncomfortable for the long run. So I think one is, can you become aware?
Could I help with that for a second?
Yes.
Anything that's going on for the person is most likely a defensive response to something that's happened to them. So then I think that allows us maybe to be more open to being aware if we understand that there's nothing wrong with us. We're not crazy.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm acting this way is because something's happened to me.
Yes.
And I'm having a normal reaction to an abnormal thing that's happened.
Yes.
So maybe that will help just have some compassion that, like, I could open myself up to now be aware.
Number one, knowing if you're in any of either like the hyper-aroused, anxious, yelling at your kids, feeling nervous, racing thoughts, or feeling kind of down, depressed, numb, disconnected, right? Dissociated from yourself, your body, the people around you. There's nothing wrong. If anything, you have a brilliant body and capacity to try to find a way to regulate. I think the second thing is, sometimes I get curious, like to look at the body symptoms or any kind of how I'm feeling, or even thoughts in my head, as like, how can I understand it? Almost use Google Translate to what's going on. Is there a need that I don't have met? Is there an emotion that needs, right, compassion, or I'm feeling so sad, right? Even just starting to like label an experience, when you name something, you tame it. It's like giving it a little bit of airtime. Or is it like, I actually need to come up with a better plan, or I need to say no to this? So I think just like in the basics, or there's a lot of pain that's coming up for me around this holiday, right? Or I'm actually really excited about this. We spoke about connection, but I'm also terrified about possibly deepening this connection with my husband or with this neighbor that I'm trying to be open to. So I know this is simplified, but I think one is like even just starting to develop attunement or get to know like what is it that you might be needing right now, and like listen into your body. That would be one of the things
Listening,
that I would
just
start with.
right.
Yeah, I would say really it's about getting in touch with your feelings. It starts with that, because if you don't know what you're feeling, then you're not going to even know what your triggers are.
So how do you get in touch with your feelings? Like, it sounds so easy.
I know. It's so
how?
Start with your body. Some people are so connected. It's really when you notice that there's emotional intensity about something, right? You're fired up. Usually there's a feeling there. And then checking in with your body. Where am I feeling it? Is it, let's say you're feeling sad. So often people will like feel it in their face, their eyes, their heart. And really just for a moment, just recognizing, oh, okay, I'm feeling sad, and really getting curious, non-judgmental. What's going on here? Right, that's what you said, Shia, like the compassion comes in. So I think it really starts with our feelings and paying attention to your body, which is all part of being curious with your feelings, like Esther said. And I think the next piece is like, there's so many parts to healing. I think it's also about learning to slow down our nervous system, which really starts with what are the things that you do in your day to ground yourself, whether it's did you eat, did you drink? The basic things we often forget, and often people who are living in fight and flight forget to do these things. Also people who are very busy. So it really just starts with, let's slow down the nervous system. Practicing yoga, I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but exercise, just throughout the day, calming your nervous system down, learning how to breathe. And I'm not saying that you have to sit there doing a 5-minute meditation, but just even like taking a deep breath in and out. Just slow, small things. I think that's another piece of healing. There's so many parts to this, it's looking at your relationships in your life. There's so many pieces.
I think on the relationship piece, can I just chime in? I think sometimes knowing what you need, like for some people, I had a client who reached out. She's like, I'm booking an appointment for after Pesach because on Pesach, knowing that I'm having a session after is going to make me feel calmer. And it was so beautiful because it's like sometimes knowing, I know for myself, like knowing that I have anchors, either a certain level of social connection or a certain amount of time, like you're talking about breathing, or a structure could be so anchoring, and knowing what you need is so important. Yeah.
So I love everything everyone's saying.
You're going to ask, what if a person can't feel their feelings?
Right,
Something like
that's
that.
what I was also,
That's number one. But even let's take it a step back, is that Pesach is such a busy time, and everyone's focused on
No time to feel
shopping
feelings.
and cleaning, and they're all really valid and really important, and they're busy. How much time do we spend just thinking about how am I feeling today?
No,
Right?
it's about getting through.
So I think this is going to take a very conscious effort of like, I have permission to not only shop for Pesach, but actually be the one shopping and be present when I'm shopping. Because if I'm just getting ready for Pesach, we're not going to be at Pesach.
right, so true.
I think sometimes there are people who are flooded with feelings. If you're going shopping or taking care of errands and you're overwhelmed or you're anxious or you're snippy or you're not actually embodying what's the point of Pesach or the holiday, which I think a lot of us struggle with. Like, are we actually really embodying what Yontif is meant to be? Like, so many rabbis say, like, focus on the point of what it is. And yes, take care of the practicalities, but can you focus on what the goal of this holiday is? I think some people are either flooded with emotions, that might be part of like how they're feeling the pressure, the rush, and some are very compartmentalized, which is what you said, they're not at all. And I think you're right, like taking a conscious effort or kind of almost channeling your voice of like, you have permission, or can you give some space to that emotional piece and what's going on for you.
And I also think that maybe this isn't the time, like sometimes we have to live in survival mode. And I think maybe this is not the time that you start like getting very curious, right? Like sometimes it's about coping and getting through it, and that's okay. But if you're spending your whole life just distracting yourself and coping
That's
and getting through it,
also
that's
a
not
mechanism.
living. Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes.
So for me, that's a sign that the person's really been pretty hurt. Right. So right away, my heart's opening up to that, right? Just sitting with that for a second.
Right.
And for that person to be able to say to themselves like, wow, like I deserve a lot of love, right? I can't feel my feelings, and I might not be able to do anything that anyone's telling me, but just bringing that awareness is so calming to me, to be able to say like, we can make a list for, to do later after Pesach or whatever, we'll figure that out. But for right now, I'm not gonna feel my feelings, okay, and I won't. But how am I gonna treat myself because I can't feel my feelings? If I could have compassion towards myself, it'll actually allow me to open up to feel my feelings probably too. That would be a nice bonus, but it'll definitely keep me in a calm space, I think.
I love that what you just said. It's almost like don't judge yourself for not being able to feel certain feelings.
Because sometimes we end up self-sabotaging. You go down a downward spiral of like, I'm bad, so I'm
And
worse.
like a common thing I'll hear from people who have been traumatized is like, I'm crazy. What's wrong with me? I'm crazy. There's no crazy. Your logical brain is offline. The whole prefrontal cortex is offline. You're in survival mode. You're not crazy, you're just surviving. So that is a
Once
survival
you figure that out,
tactic.
it really opens up so much compassion.
Yeah.
Because you're not taking all that energy. There's so much energy of judgment. It's like, could we just take the whole judgment committee and put it on the side? Like, you have to be in survival mode. You're exhausting so much energy just to function. Could we notice that? What's very common is this term called alexithymia, where people don't have an emotional vocabulary. So sometimes even getting curious or starting to develop basic emotional language is like an emotion pillow that I have in the office, but it's like knowing the difference between like sad, mad, lonely, aggravated, hopeful, curious, excited, just basic core emotions. Sometimes just getting curious about that, like there's a movie Inside Out, just starting to develop an emotional vocabulary. But I love what you said, it's not like a thing that we're like hyper fixating on, or like I need to develop. But I will say a lot of people actually feel like there's people who explode or people who implode. A lot of people, right, whose emotions are sensitive or kind of have to be shoved away, they feel a lot of feelings, just it expresses itself differently. And having the space, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say as well is that a lot of times, let's say if you're not in touch with your emotions, starting to journal could really be so helpful. I know it sounds so therapeutic, but when you have the urge to distract yourself on your phone, sometimes we're addicted, but sometimes it's because you're avoiding a feeling. And I would say, let's start paying attention to our behaviors. When is it that I distract myself? When is it that I run away? Or when is it that I yell? Being curious about that could then really help us start to develop the language. And yeah, and like Esther said, sometimes it's really just about learning the basic like language. Like today in kindergarten, they teach that, right? But when we were growing up, I mean, I don't really remember kindergarten so much, but, and I wasn't traumatized. Maybe I was. Right, I'm perfect.
That's funny.
But I do remember kindergarten. Okay, anyways. I have to take that back.
I don't remember kindergarten.
But really it's about like looking at our things that are happened throughout the week. And I say start journaling, start paying attention. You don't necessarily have to feel it yet in your body, but what would be the feeling that you might feel in this situation? And then we can start connecting it. Like, oh, I was probably angry then. And that is a really good way to start, just like looking at our daily lives and looking at the things that we're doing.
Can I speak about something positive? I love what you
Yeah.
just said. I think also like the one big concept that really has helped me and has helped a lot of clients is that often the places where we have the most pain is the places where we can have the most healing and
Gain.
possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to say for anyone who's like feeling like
There's
I know I
light on
mentioned-
the other side.
Yeah, like I want to just talk about like the concept of first of all your art. I think the concept
Post-traumatic
of
growth.
freedom, post-traumatic grauth. But that's a little too sugar-coated for me because I don't always push post-traumatic
I
growth.
was just
not
thinking
pushing it.
about this today.
I'm not pushing it. It's automatic. It's automatic. No, what I mean is that like this sounds like a daunting task to like,
Yes.
right, to do the things maybe that we're talking about. But the people on the other side of it report that they have greater appreciation for life, greater appreciation for relationships.
So much light.
Right? So I'm not pushing
So
it,
much
but
light.
Right.
but this work is something that's very valuable.
Okay. I love what you said, and I love that you clarified because sometimes when people are sitting in pain,
Yeah, I'm not
I just-
telling them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I ran this like
They're sitting in pain and what?
Yeah, so sometimes when
people-
someone's in pain, you can say, wow, you've been through trauma, but trauma makes you
gonna be
stronger.
stronger.
That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I want to make that
no,
very
he's
clear.
saying that there's incredible growth. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying? At the
meaning-
other
There's light
end.
on the other
Yeah, there
side.
is
There's
light
really
at
light on the other
side
tunnel.
of this process, and you will have a greater appreciation for life, most likely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that. What were you going to say? You said you were just thinking about.
No, I was just thinking about this today. I was imagining just like, because I'm an artist, I was imagining like rocks all around like my life. And like, it's so hard to pick up the rock, but when you pick up the rock, there's like a flower bud underneath. And it is possible, it's under. So it's hard to pick up the rock, but it's worth it.
I'm going to paint a picture of that for all of us.
So I
Yeah.
wonder if the message can be, and like maybe encompassing, or one of the messages is like, we all have rocks in our lives, and some of the rocks feel heavy, and some of them are painful, and maybe all you're at is even contemplating looking at the rocks.
Exactly.
Right, like kind of what you said. Like maybe right now you do need to still be in survival. Could you honor that and be like, wow, how brilliant is my mind and body? And if you're in the middle of raising it and it's painful and it's also joyous or a mixture of both, notice that. And if you're starting to notice the buds, or you're realizing the life that you're building or getting to build, and there's joy, like for some clients you mentioned who are in touch with the post-traumatic growth, how beautiful. I think just knowing where you're at in the process without pushing where you should or shouldn't be. Right.
Of
and
course,
I think
because
that, yeah.
even that bud underneath that, before it became a bud, was pretty disgusting.
Right.
Right.
The whole
yeah.
process involves
Exactly.
pretty disgusting things, right? And
Right.
things that look ugly, and it doesn't look like there will ever be a bud. But of course there will be.
Yeah, it's almost like the concept of, like they talk about elephants. I just want to say this in terms of like trauma and healing and freedom. They say elephants carry their babies in their bellies for a very, 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 very long time. And you would never know. You just see this elephant that's just carrying, or you don't know what's going on, and you're like, is the baby ever going to come out? Is the baby ever going to come out? But the beauty of what happens is that when the baby comes out, it's strong, it's powerful, it's part of this whole, right, elephant family. And sometimes in our lives, we're in a place where, right, kind of what you said, the seed, like it's planted, there's something growing, it's going to be really impactful, really strong, really beautiful. And if someone's engaging in some kind of healing process, please stay the course, because I know for myself, I'm sure all of you, like I've seen beautiful lives and healing and joy, and actually a sense of emotional and mental freedom that people get to experience that they never had before.
Yeah, I really agree. It was, what you're saying is that I think part of the healing, sometimes post-traumatic growth, like, I have to write a book, or I have to do something big and bold, and the healing and the growth and the amazing experience that you get out of processing your trauma and healing, we end up experiencing our lives on a whole nother level. We are integrating our feelings, so we enjoy life more. We enjoy our relationships more. We're less aggravated. We're less annoyed. We go with the flow easier.
And that's the biggest
So,
thing.
Yeah,
That is
what it is.
Yeah,
so sometimes
that's
it's like,
the goal.
it's about, when I get on the other side, I'm going to write my book,
Oh, of
or
course.
whatever it is. I'm going to write my memoir, right? And it's like, no. And the beautiful part of this is that our daily lives change.
Yeah. You'll
So
hear
I
it all the
think that's
time.
it.
Like a parent will say, I was able to have a conversation with my child. We were just like sitting on the couch and just hanging out. And that's something that could be very hard for people who are traumatized. So it's those everyday moments that just become so beautiful.
That's the freedom, right? Freedom to be in the present moment, freedom to connect. Like I love how it's freedom is accessible, it's at our fingertips, right? It's not this esoteric concept of being present with your child and connecting. I think that's why I think like noticing freedom is in these small moments, and that's what we're going for.
Yes. When we meet ourselves, when we become present and in our bodies, and we're able to be free, when we all could do that, that is going to bring Mashiach. Like when we're all in ourselves, we're running to find Mashiach and to daven and to do, but it's just all in ourselves.
Well, also, right, because when we're not burdened or shackled from disconnection, kind of what we said earlier, when we're able to connect to ourselves and each other, then that is actually real.
That's redemption.
That's
Exactly.
real redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not like living our lives by like all our beliefs, right? Like, I'm not good enough, I have to go do this, or I'm not, you know, and instead it's like, if we can just, and I think that's part of why a lot of times there's conflict between other people or people judging others is because everyone has their own, I guess, you know, beliefs about themselves, that their views have been changed because of things that we went through throughout generations. But what you're saying is if we all integrate our bodies and our minds, then yeah, then we won't be caught up in all these other things, and that ultimately will bring freedom. So
Exactly.
I love how you said that.
It's expansive.
Uh-huh.